Yeah, thank you. Okay, so actually I've given this talk a number of times, as I was saying at the beginning. I think I first gave this at the Pittsburgh Perl workshop in 2007. And I'll say, it hasn't really, I've made some updates to it, but it's essentially the same talk. If you've seen it, you should feel free to go. Also, like almost everything here is Perl 5. There's nothing Perl 6 about this at all. Actually, I was talking to some people at lunch, and some of the things do work in Perl 6, probably other things don't. I can't really guarantee what's going to work and what doesn't because I've never used Perl 6 myself. And also, the other disclaimer is that I'm only really going to talk about the highlights of things you can do. Pretty much for every one of the things I'm going to go through, there's a whole bunch of other options that you might want to use, and I'll have some resources at the end. In particular, and I'll have this at the end, if you look at the Perl run pod file, it goes into far more detail than I'm going to go into. So with that, let's go on. So, also, I'm looking for a job. So if you have a job, come see me. If you have an opening, come see me afterwards. So what's a one-liner? So, I mean, Mark showed some of these one-liners. I had a few sort of cornball one-liners too. Whatever. So these are like joke one-liners. So what's a Perl one-liner? A Perl one-liner is a complete Perl program written entirely at the command line. I feel like this is kind of fading off a little bit. So what does that mean? So and you can use this. So you can use this to write, like, kind of do guru stuff in obfuscated Perl. And I'm hoping to demystify this and feel like it can look very, that wasn't what I wanted to say, but it can look really, do that too. It can look very intimidating and it can look kind of cryptic, but it turns out that it's really useful. When I volunteered, I always struggled to write these before I did the talk at the Pittsburgh Perl workshop. And now that I understand, I use these almost literally every single day. I write some Perl one-liners to do things. So hopefully you all will find them as useful as I do. And I probably should have turned off notifications. Well, they may come up, so what? So why even use Perl one-liners, aside from them being really useful, is that, well, Perl has this reputation for producing unreadable and unmaintainable code. We've all heard this, right? And you know, there's been a lot of work on tools and techniques. You can go to many of the other talks here, the modern Perl talks and other things to get around that, and that's fine. I'm not saying that's a problem, but you know, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that Perl is still really good at doing these sort of quick and dirty glue things to just do one little job and get done with it. And like nothing's quicker and dirtier than a one-liner. But suppose, like, you don't even really write Perl for a living anymore. Certainly, like, I've given this talk to like undergrads at Drexel, who many of whom were not doing Perl at all. They were doing Java or C or all these other languages. And I spent like the last 5 years as a postdoc at Drexel working primarily as a MATLAB programmer, but still I found uses to write Perl one-liners. And why is that? Well, text files are everywhere. And if you're at the Unix command line, even in Windows, you can get a Unix command line through Cygwin or through this new bash prompt you can get in Windows 10 and get access to them there. Both text files and even like file names are also text files that you can use. And we all know this if we had the command line, right, that everything is text, and you know, you can create new quote-unquote programs by just chaining a bunch of things together. You know, and there's, you know, zillions of things, just a small subset, but you know, Perl one-liners fit really well into this niche. And you know, pretty much everything I'm going to say, like many of the things I'm going to show you, can be, you know, also done with the Unix command line tools, but you know, you can also do them in Perl. And sometimes, often it's easier to do them in Perl than to do them in things. If you're used to using Perl for other things, you know, for your coding, why not use them as part of your command line? Have it as part of your command line toolkit as well. And so you can become, even if you're in another language, you can become like this like command line, this Perl one-liner ninja, right? So you know, you can be this like little, I don't know why I have this. I think I just had like command line ninja, the description at one point, but it's kind of cute. Anyway, so, and you can get your job done faster, and it frees you up for more important things like that, right? And we all like that. Or that. I think I put that in when I was giving the talk to undergrads who couldn't drink this. Okay, so quick introduction. So how do you write a one-liner in Perl? So here is like the simplest one-liner you can write in Perl. And how does it work? Oh, so of course you run this as the command line, it prints hello world, just like you would think. So the key thing is this -e flag. So if you say -e, then the parameter that follows it is a Perl program. In this case, our Perl program just is print hello world. Okay? Now it's important unless it's like, I don't know, maybe you could just have it say print, but if you have anything that's going to have multiple things, it has to be a single parameter. So that means that on Unix, you have to put it in single quotes to avoid any kind of shell expansion, because often there's going to be $signs in there. You don't want the shell expanding the $signs. You want the $signs to get passed to Perl. And you have to quote them some way so that it becomes a single parameter that gets passed into the Perl interpreter. I say double quotes in Windows, that's only if you're at the command prompt in the command shell or the DOS shell or whatever they call it in Windows. If you're in there's other ways to do it, like I said, Cygwin or the new bash shell, then you can still put in single quotes just like in any other Unix prompt. But of course, then if you're putting double quotes, then you have to escape all the $signs, because then they will get expanded out. Okay, some other things, you don't need a final semicolon because it's a single statement in this case. Sometimes you will, sometimes you won't. And I'm not using stricter warnings because it's like you can see what's going on there, right? So, and there's no test. So of course, for this it's simple enough, but I'll have some more complicated examples. Of course, if you're using a one-liner as part of a bigger workflow that's going into production, of course you want to test it. But most of the things that I'm going to show you are things that I just put together in the command line to do a single thing and then forgot about them. So in that case, I mean, you can see the entire program right there. So often, like, I'm not going to be running stricter tests or often even my variables for what I'm doing. It's not to say that there aren't good things, but in a bigger program, of course, you want to use them for a command, for a one-liner. You can often just skip them. So in one sense, I'm kind of done already because that's how you write a one-liner. And we can run off to the pub now, right? But everything else I'm going to show you is just syntactic sugar to make it easier to write one-liners. And Perl programmers really like syntactic sugar. I love that picture. Someday I have to go to Europe and find those somewhere. I've never seen those particular Haribos in the US. I've looked for them very hard. I've seen lots of other Haribos.
Is the Perlier a Photoshop job, or
That's German for Perl eggs, and it says it makes kids happy, and it's they're fat-free. That's what und erwachsene and ebenso means. Yep. Okay, so the first flag we're going to talk about is the -L flag. So what that does is it automatically adds a new line to whatever you print. So simple example, this is the example I showed you before, and with -L, you can leave off that /n. So it's not a big deal here, you're only saving 2 characters, but they add up, and often if you have a variable that you don't have to put quotes around it like you're doing here. So also notice that the string is in the entire program is in single quotes, so that way you can put the thing that you're printing in double quotes. So single quotes around the outside, double quotes on the inside. Okay, so we all know that in Perl 5.10, they added say that lets you, it's like print, except it automatically puts a new line at the end, right? So sadly, that doesn't work with lowercase e. You get this ugly error message, at least that's what you got in 5.10. I'm assuming it's something similar to that today. So why does that happen? That happens because in order to avoid breaking backwards compatibility, it's turned off by default. So if you're writing it in a normal program, you'd have to say use 5.10.0, but you don't have to do that in a one-liner. So to turn it on in a one-liner, you can use -E instead of -e. And if you do that, then you don't have to put the new line in either, and you can say instead of print, and now you're saving, I don't know, like 5 or 6 characters, which is kind of nice. So I almost always write my one-liners now with -E instead of lowercase e, because then you can say, and you're not typing as much. So what -E really does is it tells Perl to turn on all of its optional features, and they have to stop adding optional features because I've run out of room to put them all on this slide. I added a whole bunch of them last night. I think fortunately, like almost all of these, like aside from say, I think you're unlikely to want to use any of these in a one-liner. Maybe the Unicode things you might, but you're not going to probably be writing a switch. If you're writing a switch statement, you probably want to write a real program because you want to, you want to indent things right, and some of the other things, like subroutine signatures, things like that, you might not. Maybe Rick would want to do the declared refs, which is just got added in 5.26, but he's not even here. Maybe FC. Yeah, so FC you might, but most of the other ones you wouldn't. And I've even though all these get turned on, I've never run into an issue. I think just because I normally am doing something simple. Okay, so anyway, so the -L is just the beginning of things that you can do, and now we're starting to get into the really powerful things. So often what you want to do in a one-liner is, and often what you're doing when you're doing shell programming, like pipe programming, is you've got some files you want to go do some sort of processing over every line in the file and do something with it. So this is a simple program where it's going to print all of the characters, all the lines that are longer than 80 characters long. And now this is all fine, and this will work just fine, but this is a really common pattern that comes up all over and over again. Hi, Mark. And so there's, so that gets really tedious. So if you add the -N flag, then it automatically puts a loop around things. So really all the code that goes after the -E then gets implicitly put into a while loop, like a while less than greater than loop. So what does that mean in practice? So that means, so this is the program we had before. And again, this works just fine. But if you say -N, now all you're doing is just putting the body of a loop down here. And you're looping over, potentially, all of the .pl files in your directory, right? And, you've got an entire program that's doing looping just with that, right? It's super useful. Okay, but now you just have this loop. What happens if you want to do some processing that's not in that loop? Well, then you use begin and end blocks. So let's say we just have a simple text file that just has 1, 2, 3, and 4 on 4 lines, right? If we want to add them up, we say -N and then a capital E because I want to say over here, and we just take every one of the lines and add, keep adding them to $S. And again, I'm not using a my variable. You could if you wanted to, but it's because I don't have warnings, it's not going to warn me about that. And it's a one-liner, right? It's like 20 characters long. So this is the block. This is what's going to be inside the loop, right? So so now at the end of the loop, it's added everything up, but we have to print it out. So in order to print it out, we put that into an end block, and the code that's in this end block says say $S, and that's going to print it out. And when it prints out, it's going to print 10 because it's 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. Okay? Oops, what did I do there? All right. If you want to multiply them instead of dividing, then you have to initialize it. So now I'm going to say P for product, just like $S was for sum. Now we have to initialize the product to 1, and then we multiply all of them to 1. So it's 1 times, well, it's going to start with 1, and then 1 times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4, and that's 24. So now we have a begin block where we initialize things, and we have an end block where we print things out. Okay? Everyone following so far? Any questions so far? Yes?
So in the first example, the program that is created, are there 10 end blocks?
No. No, the question was, in the program that's created, are there 10 end blocks? Why would there be 10?
Because there must be 10 lines in the nums file.
No, the nums file is 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay, are there 4 blocks in the?
No, because what it's essentially doing is your code, the normal code goes into this part, and the begin block's going to get run up here, if you can see that, and the end block is going to get run after the while loop. So begin goes before the while loop, just like the begin is going to run before any of the other code in your program, just like any other begin block would. So probably you don't normally write begin and end blocks, but that's how they work. And then the end block will run after the rest of your program is executed. And that's what they're doing here. It's just kind of piggybacking on that behavior. All right, so here's another common pattern where you want to convert a file to lowercase. So you could try, what are you doing? Right, so you could do this, and so what we're going to do is just use the tr command to take all the characters from A to Z and capital A to Z and translate them to lowercase A to Z, and then print them out at the end, right? And if you do this, it's just going to print them out to standard out, right? And if you want to print them to a file, you redirect it to standard out, right? So this is fine, and this all works fine still, but this is also a pretty common pattern where you're going to do some sort of modification to every line in the file and then print out whatever you have at the end. That's where the -p flag comes in. So that's like the -n flag, where there's this block in the middle where your code's going to go, except that after it's processed every line, it prints whatever, so it says print, this is from the documentation, but really what it's printing is whatever $_ is after every line. So if you do any kind of modification to that line, and normally you're going to be modified, because it's in this implicit, like greater than or less than loop, everything is in $_, and then you can modify it, and then it prints out whatever $_ is at the end. And right, if it gets some kind of error, it prints it out, but that's not that important. Right, so I said, so it's like the -n flag, except it prints out each line when it gets finished with it. So this is what we had before, and this is what we had at the end. It's a little bit down at the bottom, I apologize for that. But basically, it just got rid of the print thing at the end. So all this is doing some modification to each of the lines, and then it just implicitly gets printed out at the end. So the useful part of this comes at the, well, in what I'm going to come up with next. So some advanced things. So those, I think, just between the -l, which isn't even that useful anymore with say, and -n and -p are the two really super useful things. And because now you can write these entire things to loop over files very simply, just from the command line, because you're only writing the block, and often you only have to write a couple of lines of code to process the block. So one thing you might want to do, and like often with the -p flag you're printing out, what you really want to do is not just do some kind of report, like maybe you would take that report and spit it out to standard out, but you also might want to make a bunch of edits to a file and then save it back out. So that's what the -i flag does. So if you do this, what that's going to do is read in a.pl. Right, so if you do this, actually, it's going to read in a.pl, change all the occurrences of foo to bar, and then print it out, okay? And this is because you made some modifications, and it prints whatever is in $_. If you edit it in place, and I'll say why I have quotes there in a second, so if you add the -i flag with it as well, then it will change all the occurrences of foo to bar and then save it back into a.pl. So whatever was in e.pl before gets clobbered, and the new version has all the occurrences of foo changed to bar. This is really useful if you're doing things like changing like a copyright notification, or you decide you have a whole bunch of code that you want to change all the names of the variables from something to something else. It's really useful for that. The reason I say in place is because I think it doesn't actually keep the same inode that was there before. So if it was a hard link, it gets changed and it's not a hard link anymore. So there's some like subtle differences in that. But essentially that's what it's doing. Although this is kind of dangerous, right? So, oh, I'll get to that in a second. You can also edit multiple files just by using stars, like doing shell expansion like that, and or glob expansion. And if you do it there, it'll change all the foo's, the bars, in all the .pl files that you have. If you were in like bash or z shell, you could say */*star.pl, it would do everything in the subdirectory. So you can see, like, if you have like some sort of very simple change you want to make for a whole, like one directory or a whole like subtree, it's really simple to do just by doing it that way. Right, but obviously it's dangerous, right? Because if you make one mistake, you've clobbered everything else. So you can also specify a backup file. So this is what I had before, and if you put some sort of an extension after the -i, then it saves the original file in the name of the file dot that extension. Or so in this case, the original a.pl is going to be renamed to a.back, a.pl.back, because there's a .bak after the I, and then whatever, so the resulting a.pl will be the new file, if that makes sense. And it doesn't have to be dot, like if you didn't leave this back, if you let the dot out, if you let the dot off of here and just say I back, the original file will be named a.plbak without the dot. So you need to have the dot there. It's still a little dangerous because if you run it a second time, you realize that something got screwed up. Now the second time you are clobbering things, but at least you can do it once, and you can do it that way. I find that I don't use this much anymore because if you have everything in version control, if you screw something up in your .i, you can get it back pretty easily. And you're already kind of used to doing this kind of stuff in your version control system, Git or whatever you're using, and so it can be a little less confusing than trying to worry whatever you're going to get, like dealing with these .back files. But still, this is a super useful thing if you want to automate doing a bunch of kind of simple edits to some files. Okay, next, auto split. So if you put the -a flag, then that automatically splits every line. So awk does this automatically. So I'm not sure whether -a is supposed to be for awk or for auto split, whatever you want to think about it is. So normally it splits things on space, and you can use the -F flag to split on something other than space. Oh, and it saves everything. When it splits it, it puts it into the variable @F. So here, what it's doing is it's running the PS command, and it wants to find all the processes whose parents are init. So the parent process ID is the 4th column in the output of this particular command. So it's going to run that, and it's going to run Perl, auto split things, and then it's going to split if the 4th column, which is in like the 0, 1, 2, 3 of this, so it's going to auto split things into %F, look for the 4th thing, and if it's 1, then it will print it out. Yeah, does that, I'm sorry, I think that might be a little confusing the way I said it, so.
And split is on one space or white space? Because if that's PSCXL, then you've got more than
I think that it must be multiple spaces. That's a good question. The question is it split on one space or multiple spaces? I think it's on a group of white space. Is that true? Because I'm sure that this works, and so it must be going on groups of spaces like S/S+. So if you want to split on something other than spaces, like if you want to go through etc password, which is delimited by colons, then you say you -F, and here you say -F colon, and that means split on colons. And here are what I want to print: the user IDs and the usernames, which just happen to be in those columns. I think it's the 3rd column and the 1st column here, or the 2nd and the 0th. Okay, so this is one thing that has gotten a little easier to use since I first wrote it. So in Perl 5.20, they simplified how auto-splitting works a little bit. So now, if you specify the -f flag, they're assuming that you want to split things, because why else would you be specifying the -f flag? I'm sorry, yes?
Does that chef allow regular functions, like split? You don't know.
Yeah, I'm guessing it does, but I don't know off the top of my head. You think it does? Yeah, I would be surprised if it doesn't. You might have to put them, you might have to make sure you put them in single quotes, I guess, so they don't get, right? The question is, does the capital F flag allow for regular expressions? And it does. Yeah.
Also, I checked, and multiple spaces.
That's the default, is multiple spaces, right? Yeah, I should change that next time I do it. Thank you. Right, so as of 5.20, if you say -F, it assumes that you want to auto-split so that it doesn't, you don't have to specify -A. And so it assumes, it implies that you've done -A. And if you do -A, it assumes that you want to loop over all your inputs, so it assumes that you've set the -N flag. Thank you. So that means you can leave a lot of letters off when you're running it. So now instead of -ANE, you can just say -AE for this example. And for this example, you can look at what it had before. So here it was -ANE, and here it's just -AE. For this one, it was ALN and then F colon, and here is just -LF colon. So you can leave a few things off, which is nice. If you want to use modules, so you can also include modules from the command line, and the way you do that is with the -M flag. So this doesn't really save you a lot. Like, you could always write a program just like this. Here use LWP simple and then get print, the Pittsburgh Perl workshop website. This could still be a little tricky if you wanted to have in some cases, if you wanted to have a -N, because you'd want to put that in a begin block maybe, or something like that. So if you use a -M flag, then you can do it this way. So you just say -M and then LWP : simple, and then everything else afterwards. So it's not really saving you a whole lot of time. It's saving you having to type in use. You can do that. If you want to pass parameters in, like if you wanted to have where you normally say, like list utils and then QW, I forget what's in there, shuffle in list utils, you put an equal sign instead of to separate them. Yeah, I should have an example of that, but I don't. Okay, so that's still a little bit ugly. So what you can do, and I have to thank Mike Greb for this trick, because I would have never thought of it myself, is to put any modules or any kind of code you might want to use in a module, from a command line into a module. And then, like, in your home directory, so you're not going to muddy up like your default areas. And then call it y.pm. So in this case, y.pm is just using LWP simple and has a 1 at the end. So now you can say, instead of this, you can just say -my. This is really clever, I think. And you can do more than that, because like one thing you can also do is put some utility functions. So what this is going to do is, and this, I mean, it looks like a lot, right? But I write stuff like this all the time. I think every program I've ever written has had a block of code that looks like this, right? So what is that doing? That's sorting by the values, and then it's sorting by the values and printing value and then the key. So if you have this test file and you want to print the occurrences and have them go in increasing order, you just run a perl-my and then ne, and you accumulate them like this, very simple, and then at the end you just run that script from the previous thing and it prints it out. And if you do this, you get the output that looks like that. So that's kind of clever. I would not have thought to do that. So thank Mike Greb for coming up with that idea. That's really cool.
Yeah, but does it work now that the dot's not in ink?
Does it work the dots not in ink?
Yeah. If you run this in your
I put,
I mean, if you got
No, well,
Directory that's on your personal ink, that's fine, but you gotta.
I think, right, that's true. The question is, in 5.26, where the dot is not in ink, you would, I say, probably not want to do, that would not be super useful for this anyway, because, you know, who knows what directory you're in when you're writing your one-liner, so you would probably put this in like, you know, home/modules or something like that. Yeah, I would make my own directory and then add that directory, like from my, yeah, put that into my Perl lib separately, and then make sure that it's there. And you might want to have other things that you don't want to maybe put for the system, you know, for your system Perl modules, just like little utility things like that you could put other things like that in there as well. So have your own local modules and put that in, just like you have like your own elisp directory or something like that. Okay, so another thing you can do is specify input record separators. So, so normally when so all of these things are really to read in one line at a time, right? So you're processing one line at a time, doing something with it, line. But Perl lets you change the input record separator, which is $// and you could change it to something else. So you could split on something other than a new line. And certainly you could put that into a begin block, but there's other ways to do that as well. You could do that with the dash O0. Is that I honestly remember that. Is that 0 or O? I think that's an O. It's a 0. Yes, it's a 0, the -0 flag. So, so there's a number of different things. So I'll just show you this. So this sets the input record separator to carriage returns. This sets it to, if you just have a 0 without anything else, it makes it be null, which is useful if you're running find-print 0, because often, like you do this if you can't split on, if there's spaces in your file names, you're running find, you can't, normally find's going to split on, or other things are going to split on spaces, but you can't if the file names have spaces in them, so it puts null characters at the end. So look at examples for how find-print 0 works, because it is useful in some cases. If you say -00, it splits on paragraphs, which is like a blank line. And if you say -0777, it slurps in the entire file all at once. So now, like, your loop is going to just ever read in one line, it's going to be the entire file. So I'm going to ask Rick, because he just walked in here. I thought you had told me at some point that the paragraph mode was useful for parsing postfix files. And I haven't seen anything that has blank lines in postfix logs, so. The output of the mail queue command. Thank you. Right, so, and there's other things. So to repeat what Rick said, the paragraph mode is useful for the mail queue, MAILQ command, which lists all the messages that are currently in the mail queue separated by a line. So if you wanted to change your record separator so that everything it reads in is one entry in the mail queue, then you could say -00, and you would get them in like that. Yes? For LDAP? LDIF. Right. Right, LDIF, so that was another example. Undoubtedly, there are many others that you can think of. So, this is a summary of all the flags. Don't worry about copying these all down because the slides are all online. And here's some more information. If you run Perl-H, you can get a short summary of all of Perl's command line flags, and there are many more than I discussed here. Perl-doc Perl run explains in more detail how they all work. How am I doing on time? I have like 20 minutes left, yeah, right? Yeah, okay, sorry, I have a lot of examples, so that's good. These are some resources I found. I was a little disappointed. I looked last night at that @Perl one-liner account on Twitter, and it hasn't been updated in 1,725 days, which is kind of sad, but there's still some things there. It's still an account, so you can look at, but it's not being updated regularly. And there's a book which I have not read by Petrus Crummins. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, on Perl one-liners. I've heard good things about it. I haven't read it myself. So So what I have after this is just lots of examples of showing one-liners. So if you have any questions, or otherwise I'll go on to the one-liners. Yes?
There's a conflict for dash zero. If you use dash zero with something, then minus zero something, minus L, minus zero something, you can set both dollar slash and dollar backslash.
What does dollar backslash do?
That's output separator.
Oh, the output separator.
Yes.
Oh,
You have to use minus zero, minus L, and minus zero.
so what Abigail just said is that if you run -0, -L, -0 again, that sets the input separator and the output separator both to null? To
Whatever parameter you're giving.
Oh, to whatever parameter you're giving.
Because 0 on its own sets them both to the same thing, right? Yes. But then L locks in the input separator. And
Right.
you can reset 0 again.
Right. Okay. So you can run, essentially you can run -0 twice. The first time is for the input separator, and then you can say something else, and then -0 again to set the output separator. And that might be useful if you're trying to write the equivalent of what find -print 0 does. If what you're printing out has spaces in it and you don't want to have the thing next in line in your pipeline, worry about the spaces. Okay, so I don't know. Java doesn't have one-liners. Lots of examples. So might be the one that I run the most, is that I use Perl as a desktop calculator. This is mainly because I've never figured out how to run BC, which I guess is the way you're quote-unquote supposed to do this. And someone told me at lunch that if you run BC-F, maybe, because I always got confused about like the precision. The precision wasn't what I expected it to be. It truncates fractions, like decimals or something. I don't know. I'm used to how math works in Perl. It's simple enough to do this, especially if you say -E. So it's like Perl -E, say, and then a mathematical expression, it will print it out. I use this all the time. Even when, for 5 years as a MATLAB programmer, where I had a REPL that could do the same thing, I still ended up using Perl to do this. I also use one-liners to do like sort of just word puzzles, like this is an example to find palindromes. So if you install the right package in like Debian or Ubuntu, you get this file called user shared dict words, which is just this very, very long word list from like Webster's Third New International Dictionary or something like that. It's super useful for helping you out in word problems. So this just prints everything where so it's going to read in one line at a time because every line has a single word on it. And if that word equals the reverse of that word, then it's a palindrome, right? So it prints them out. It's not, it's just giving you simple examples of what you can do. Suppose you want to print out all the lines with their line number, then you can use a special variable $, which gives you the input line number. So it's basically the line number of the file that it's read in. So this just prints out every line preceded by its line number. Of course, you could also do cat-n, but if you didn't know that cat had a -n flag, or you're already doing something else and you don't want to pipe it through cat, you can do that. You can do that instead. I think it starts at 1. The question is, does it start at 0 or 1? I'm sure it starts at 1 because there wouldn't be any, there's no zeroth, there's not a zeroth line. So I'm almost positive they start at 1. So I don't know. I think this is another example of doing averages. So this is also useful. In this example, it prints just lines 10 through 20, and it uses the dot operator, which probably most of us have only ever used to get a range in list context. But if you use it in scalar context, it's kind of magic, because it's false until you're at the line where it's listed, and then it's true until it gets to the second one. So basically, it's going to be false until $dot is 10, which is true on the 10th line, and then it will be true for all of those, and it'll print out those lines until it gets until $dot equals 20, and then it will be false again. So it's a flip-flop operator, is that what they call it? So I don't know. Read up on that in Perl op under range operators.
And that's hardwired to use $dot in the if instead of $_, because you have a range in there?
Dollar sign underscore is what's getting printed. Dollar sign underscore is what's getting printed by print. And the dot dot, because dot dot here is in scalar context, because it's after if, it's in scalar context. So it works completely differently than you normally think that it does.
Okay, it's even crazier, right? Because the operators, the dot operators are expressions. It's arbitrary expressions, but they're constant integers. It would be pointless to use those, so that turns into dollar dot compared to the integer.
Cool.
So what Rick said. So read that section in, yeah, it again goes into more detail in that part of the Perl documentation. And I'm clicking on things which I shouldn't do. So you can also grep with Perl regular expressions. So of course you can do this poor man's grep just with this, and it's going to print out all the lines that start with foobar, right? But now you can get grep with the full power of Perl's regular expressions, so you can do lines with foo not followed by bar, and bar not preceded by foo. And I think there's somebody wrote a version of grep that uses Perl regular expressions. But if you don't have that installed, and if you're like me, you can't even remember the name of it, you can do it all from Perl. And you can grep on paragraphs instead of just on lines. And maybe there's an option in mgrep to do that. I have no idea. But you can do that, right? You could grep through your mail queue and look for particular things, which I'm sure Rick probably does 27 times, like 100 times a day to do that, right? Okay, this is something that came up where I think someone had just asked me, does RAND produce the same sequence with the same seed on different platforms? And I ran this, I think, on a Ubuntu box on 16-bit and on my Mac laptop, which I think was a PowerPC chip at the time, and maybe on OpenBSD, and I got the same results. And that was just 5 times. Here, I ran it, I think, 100,000 times and piped it into MD5 sum, and I got the same result on all of them. So, I mean, that's not super exciting. In this case, what I wanted to do was I had this program called WNPathSeek that it was doing some sort of random number stuff, but I wanted it to do it for whatever it's like for 10 up to 400. So I wanted to do 10, and then I wanted to pick 10 random things, and then 20, and then 30, and then 40, all the way up to 400. But I wanted each of them to have the same seed, so it would have the same list of all the things. And I don't know, I probably could have done it in the code, but it was easier to do it this way. And first of all, just a pain in the butt in general, initializing, seeding a random number generator in C, because you have to do all these shenanigans of how do you construct it, like maybe you look in dev random, I don't know. All that's built into Perl to come up with a good way of seeding the random number generator, so why not let Perl give you a seed for your random number generator for another program, which is what I'm doing here. I also discovered you can split, so what this is doing is just giving me a random number between 0 and 2 to the 32nd minus 1. So I don't know, this is, right, so you can put one-liners in shell scripts like I had here. And this, I guess, it would be a case where you would really want to test this if it were a production thing and see if that was working well. You can do this in Bash, someone told me, with the $random. I would still argue that Perl is a little better because random only gives you a number between 0 and 32767, so it's only a short, where Perl can give you a long. So I still think Perl is better in this case. But I mean, for what I was doing, it probably would have been fine, but I didn't know it existed. I had this weird issue when I was working on my dissertation, that I had this entry in my bibliography that wasn't printing out right. It wasn't putting the dash. It only printed out as human-computer interaction instead of human-computer interaction. And I discovered that it was because it was a Unicode dash, like I had copied and pasted it from some website. And it had a Unicode dash instead of regular dash, and LaTeX only really likes ASCII. It doesn't like Unicode at all. So I wrote this one-liner, just print out every line that had a non-ASCII character in there. And there turned out to be a whole bunch of other ones in my BibTeX file as well. Here's a bunch of different examples. This is my last example of adding a line to the beginning of a file. So what this does is, so we have this file called test.txt. And I want to just put the line first at the beginning of the file. So one way to do it is you say -0777, so that slurps in the entire file. That's all in $underscore. we say well, we can say dash I because we're going to edit it in place, and dash N puts that implicit loop. So now it loops one time, the entire file is in $_ and now we say print $_ print first, and a new line in $_. It's going to print that, and it's going to go back into test.txt. So now we've added the line first at the top of the file. Okay, thank you. So that's one way to do it. That's probably the most straightforward way of doing it. We can change the dash N to dash P, and then we don't have to put the print. So we can just say $_ equals that, and that gets loaded in. Or we can do this in a more obfuscated way, where all we do is run a regular expression to just change. Yeah, so it's going to operate on $_ whatever is there, and it doesn't matter, and change that entire string to first, and a new line. Wait, now what does that do? That says it matches nothing. So it matches, I guess, the very beginning of the line. And then puts first, and so it changes the very beginning of it to first, a new line, and then everything else. Yeah. So, is added this. So I think this is very much under the lines of like, there's always more than one way to do all of these things. And almost everything I said, like I said at the beginning, could be done with all the other shell utilities that are out there. But I don't know, I found that like the more I used Perl one-liners to do things, the more I kept using it, because like I use Perl to do other things too, and it kind of just maps. I already know I can, I have a really good idea of how Perl is going to do these things, where I might get confused about if I wanted to if I had to use awk to split the lines instead of Perl, it might actually be less code, but I'd have to remember how awk worked, and I already know how Perl works, so I don't have to do that. And there's cut, which can do some of these things too, but like I already kind of know how Perl works to do these things, so I end up just doing that instead. What else did I want to say about that? So, yeah, like I said, like this is probably, like I find all of these to be super useful, and I end up doing many of these almost every day. So with that, I guess that was the end of it, so thanks a lot. Let me know, does anyone else have any other questions? No? Yes? Where's what?
Where are the slides? Are up there?
If these slides are not online yet, but I think about 4 or 5 other versions of it are online. If you just look for my name and one-liners, you'll probably find them pretty easily. And as soon as I get a chance, I'll put these up there as well. I think I have them all with like the names of whatever conference I gave them at. Yeah.
This is one line. Do you ever find yourself burying dashy quote, couple lines quote in script?
I'm sorry, do I?
Do you ever find yourself burying dashy quote, 2 or 3 lines quote in scripts, in bash scripts?
I guess I don't write a lot of bash scripts. So someone asked me, like, how do you know, like when I gave this talk before, how do you know like how long you should make a one-liner? And I guess there's no real good answer for this, because like normally you're just writing this for yourself in the course of like other things you're doing, right? I once worked with someone that would write basically entire DBI programs from the command line. He would write them, they would be 4 or 5 lines long going all the way across, and like it drove me crazy because I found them really hard to read, and at that point I would probably break them out to write a program. But they made sense for him, and if you're just writing them, these are almost always going to be things that you're just writing for yourself, so I think it's up to you whether you think it makes sense to do it or not. I find once it starts wrapping around to the second line, it becomes hard to parse it, at least for me. And at that point, I probably would write it to a file. But it's nice to just have it be kind of transient, and often it's going to sit there in your command history, and you can get back to it and maybe tweak it to do other things. Yeah, Rick.
So if you have these really long one-liners that don't fit in one line, you can pass each part of the program as a separate -E, and then you can /enter to continue your one-liner across multiple lines. So,
Oh. So I will say, one thing that I could not get to work, and maybe Rick does this, I really wanted to get an example because I saw all the things that get turned on with -E, and one of them is subroutine signatures. And I tried to write a one-liner with a subroutine signature, and I could not get it to work last night.
Get turned on. Subroutine signatures get turned on. -E turns on all of the features in the current version bundle. And subroutine signatures are not part of any standard version bundle.
I thought instead of version bundles, it said all of the optional features get turned on. And I guess I thought that,
If you look at the profile for the feature, it lists all the features in each version bundle. And none of those yet includes subroutine signatures, although maybe 528 will have none.
that's sad, but thank you. Okay, so I'm out of time. So I guess, unless I get kicked off, I will continue answering questions, but I think I'm gonna have to go soon. Yes?
I was going to say that several of the compiled line fixes are implemented by actually reading in the stream, modifying the stream before actually compiling it, which makes for all kinds of interesting opportunities to abuse that.
Yes, so, right, so in fact, that little block of code I showed for what the -N flag and the -P flag does, I think it's actually ends up being like that in the compiler, interpreter, whatever Perl is doing. So there's something called, I was talking to some people at lunch about this, that there's something called the Eskimo operator. The Eskimo kiss, which means that you, instead of an open curly brace, closed curly brace, it's a closed curly brace, open curly brace, because that closed curly brace ends that implicit loop that you're getting around greater than, less than, and then you can put your own code afterwards. I would say that I mean, I really tried to make this as like an accessible, like kind of useful, like everyday stuff, which is why I try to avoid things like that. But yeah, so that would be more, maybe if I ever do a mystifying one-liners talk, I'll get into more of that stuff. But I think I'm out of time, so thank you very much.